I'll never forget the day Sherry confronted me about my past. It wasn't a casual argument, or a fleeting moment of anger. It was a full-blown eruption of buried resentment. We were in the middle of dinner, the smell of roasted chicken and garlic filling the kitchen, when she slammed her fork onto the table. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling, "how long did you think you could keep this from me?" I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Her eyes burned with fury, a mix of hurt and betrayal simmering just beneath the surface. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I had a sinking feeling I was about to find out. "What are you talking about, Sherry?" I asked cautiously, setting my fork down. "Keep what from you?" She laughed bitterly and pulled out her phone. With a flick of her finger, she opened an email and slid it across the table. There, staring back at me, was a grainy photo of me from 5 years ago, holding hands with another woman outside a hotel. My stomach dropped. "That's not what it looks like," I began, but the words sounded hollow, even to me. Her laugh turned into something darker. "Don't insult me, Jack. I already know. Susan told me everything." Ah, Susan, her best friend, the self-proclaimed relationship expert who never quite liked me. She must have dug up something from the past and spun it into gold for Sherry. "I was drunk," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was stupid. It meant nothing. But the damage was done." Sherry didn't yell or throw things. She just looked at me with a kind of weary sadness that was infinitely worse. "I thought we were building something real," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I thought you were my safe place." Her words hit me like a freight train. I wanted to apologize, to beg her to see the years of love and commitment since that one reckless night. But before I could say anything, she stood up and left the room, leaving her untouched dinner and a deafening silence in her wake. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, things between us have been strained. Sherry has been cold, distant. I've tried to bridge the gap, but she brushes me off with clipped responses and forced smiles. I thought it was just time she needed. But then, last night, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. Her phone lit up on the counter while she was in the shower, and the name, Greg, popped up. The message preview was brief but suggestive. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." I stood there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. A million thoughts raced through my mind, each one more devastating than the last. Could she really be doing this? Could she be having an affair? The irony wasn't lost on me. After all, I had been the one to break her trust first. But revenge? Is that what this was? I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I spent the night tossing and turning, wondering how much further this rift between us could go. Was this payback? Or was this the beginning of the end? The following morning, I woke up to the sound of Sherry humming in the kitchen. It was almost surreal. She hadn't been this cheerful in weeks. As I dragged myself downstairs, the smell of coffee greeted me, but the unease in my chest didn't ease. "Morning," she chirped, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Her smile seemed genuine, but I couldn't help feeling like I was staring at a stranger. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. I couldn't bring myself to mention the text from Greg. Not yet. I needed to know more. I had to be certain. "I'm heading out with Lisa later," she said, sipping her coffee. "Just some shopping. We might grab lunch, so don't wait up." "Sounds nice," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lisa, her oldest friend, was usually the go-to alibi. But I wasn't buying it this time. As soon as Sherry left, I called Lisa. "Hey Lisa, it's Jack. Is Sherry meeting you today?" There was a long pause on the other end. No. She didn't mention anything." "Why?" "No reason," I said, quickly covering. "Just checking." "Thanks." My stomach churned. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, this was confirmation. Sherry was lying to me. I decided to follow her. I'm not proud of it, but I couldn't sit in the dark any longer. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. Sure enough, Her car was still in the driveway of the same hotel I'd seen her name attached to in Greg's texts. I parked a few blocks away, heart pounding, and watched the entrance. Minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last. Finally, Sherry walked out, arm in arm with a man I didn't recognize at first, but then it hit me. Greg Allen. Her boss. They were laughing, completely at ease. Sherry's hand lingered on his arm, and my chest tightened as I watched them climb into his car together. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This was real. It wasn't just payback for my mistake years ago, this was her choosing someone else over me. I sat there for what felt like hours, debating my next move. Confronting her in the moment felt tempting, but I couldn't shake the memory of her devastated face when she found out about me. I owed her more than a scene in a parking lot. When I got home, Sherry was already there, curled up on the couch like nothing had happened. She greeted me with a warm smile, and I had to resist the urge to yell, to demand answers. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Good," she said, stretching. "Lisa and I had a great time. She sends her love." I nodded, my mind spinning. "That's nice." It was a lie, a blatant, bold-faced lie. But instead of confronting her, I decided to play along. If Sherry was willing to double down, then so was I. I had no intention of letting this spiral out of control without understanding every detail. I just needed time to figure out my next move. That night, as Sherry slept beside me, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Her steady breathing was a cruel mockery of the chaos swirling in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her laughing with Greg, her hand on his arm, the casual intimacy of it slicing deeper than I thought possible. By the time dawn broke, I knew what I had to do. If Sherry was determined to keep lying, I needed proof, something undeniable. I wasn't going to make accusations only to have her twisted around. I spent the day discreetly preparing. I installed a small GPS tracker under her car and a voice recorder in her bag. It felt invasive, wrong even, but I justified it by reminding myself of what I'd seen. I had to protect myself, didn't I? Later that evening, as we sat across from each other at dinner, I tried to act normal. But the tension was palpable. She noticed. "You've been quiet," she said, tilting her head. "Something on your mind?" "No, just tired," I replied with a shrug, stabbing at my food. "Work's been stressful." She nodded sympathetically. "I know the feeling. Greg's been piling on the projects lately." There it was, his name. Casual, harmless, like he wasn't the same man I'd seen her leave the hotel with. "Greg's lucky to have you," I said, forcing a smile. "You're always so dedicated." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks, Jack." The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something was off. When she went to bed early, claiming a headache, I waited until I heard her soft snores before slipping into the living room. I retrieved the recorder from her bag, my hands shaking as I plugged it into my laptop. At first, there was nothing but muffled noises. Then her voice came through, clear and familiar. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," she was saying. My heart pounded as I strained to hear the response. "Greg." His voice was unmistakable. "You don't have to," he said, his tone soothing. "You know I'll take care of everything. Just say the word." Sherry sighed. "It's not that easy, Greg. I have a life with Jack. I can't just walk away." My jaw clenched as I listened to her weigh her options like I was some inconvenience. I wanted to smash the laptop, to storm upstairs and demand an explanation. But I forced myself to stay calm. There was more. I need to be sure," she continued, "that this is worth it. That you're worth it." Greg's laugh was low and self-assured. "You know I am." I couldn't listen anymore. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling with rage. She was calculating, playing both sides while deciding if her shiny new affair was worth burning our marriage to the ground. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, the recorder sitting like a lead weight on the coffee table. The next morning, Sherry came down looking refreshed, her hair damp from a shower. "Did you sleep out here?" she asked, frowning. "Yeah," I lied. "Fell asleep watching TV." She accepted the answer easily, planting a quick kiss on my forehead before grabbing her keys. "I'm heading out for errands. I'll be back later." I waited for her to leave before pulling up the tracker app on my phone. Her car was already moving, heading in the direction of downtown. I grabbed my jacket and followed, keeping a safe distance. When she pulled into the same hotel parking lot, I knew I was done pretending. Today, I would confront her. She wouldn't see it coming. I parked across the street from the hotel, my heart hammering in my chest. Sherry's car sat in its usual spot, her habit of backing and neatly giving her way. I watched as she got out, her perfectly polished heels clicking against the pavement. She glanced around, a flicker of nervousness crossing her face before she smoothed it away and walked inside. I sat there, torn between a million emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness, and surprisingly, guilt. How had it come to this? How had the woman I once promised forever to become someone I no longer recognized? And yet, hadn't I started this chain of destruction years ago with my own selfish mistake? But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about her lies, her betrayal, and the way she'd made a mockery of our marriage. I got out of the car and walked into the hotel, my fists clenched at my sides. The lobby was busy enough to keep me from standing out, but I still felt like every eye was on me as I made my way to the front desk. "Excuse me," I said, leaning in close to the receptionist. "Can you tell me which room Sherry Allen is in?" "She just checked in." The receptionist raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, sir. We can't give out that information." "Look," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I'm her husband. I just want to surprise her." She hesitated, glancing around before leaning closer. "Room 214. But don't tell anyone I told you." I nodded my thanks and headed for the elevator, every step heavier than the last. My reflection in the polished elevator doors looked foreign to me, tight-lipped, eyes dark with fury. I barely recognized myself. When the elevator dinged on the second floor, I stepped out and found room 214 at the end of the hall. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Then I knocked. There was a shuffle inside, voices muffled behind the door. A man's laugh, Greg's laugh, cut through the tension like a knife. The door opened a crack, and Sherry's face appeared, her eyes wide with shock. "Jack," she breathed, her voice barely audible. What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, my voice cold and steady. I pushed the door open, forcing her to step back. Greg was standing by the bed, his tie loosened, his jacket draped over a chair. He froze when he saw me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "This is not what it looks like," Sherry stammered, stepping in front of me as if to block my view of Greg. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice rising. "You think I don't know? You think I haven't seen the texts, the sneaking around, the lies?" Sherry's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But instead, she straightened her shoulders, her expression hardening. "You don't get to play the victim here, Jack," she snapped. "Not after what you did." "What I did?" I said, incredulous. "That was years ago, Sherry. One mistake. I thought we'd moved past it." "Well, clearly we haven't," she shot back. "Do you have any idea how long I've been carrying that? How many nights I've stayed up wondering if you'd do it again? This," she gestured between herself and Greg, "this is because of you." Greg cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe I should go." "Don't you dare," I said, cutting him off. "You're just as much a part of this as she is." Sherry turned on him, her voice sharp. "No, Greg. Stay. He needs to hear this." I stared at her, my heart sinking. Whatever words she was about to say, I knew they would change everything. And they did. "I didn't do this to hurt you, Jack," she said, her voice softening. I did this to feel alive again. To feel something besides the betrayal you left me with. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd come here ready to confront her, to hold her accountable for her betrayal. But now, standing in that hotel room, I realized the cracks in our marriage ran deeper than I ever imagined. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to feel anymore. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same. I drove home in silence, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Sherry hadn't tried to stop me when I walked out of the hotel room. Neither had Greg. In fact, Greg had stood there, avoiding eye contact, while Sherry delivered her final verbal dagger. I did this to feel alive again. The words echoed in my head, each repetition like nails on a chalkboard. How did we get here? How had the marriage we built on love and trust crumbled into this mess of infidelity and blame? When I got home, the house felt unbearably quiet. I poured myself a drink, whiskey straight, and sank into the couch. My thoughts spiraled, jumping between anger, guilt, and a sickening sense of emptiness. This wasn't just about Sherry's affair or my mistake years ago. It was about the years in between, the unresolved wounds we'd ignored, the cracks we'd plastered over without ever fixing the foundation. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, nursing my drink and staring at nothing, before the front door opened. Sherry stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood. She hesitated when she saw me, as if gauging whether it was safe to approach. "Jack," she began, her voice tentative. "Can we talk?" I didn't look at her. "What's there to talk about? You said everything I needed to hear back there." She stepped closer, her tone shifting to frustration. "Don't do that. Don't act like this is all on me. You're not blameless, Jack." "Blameless?" I snapped, finally looking up at her. "I made one mistake, one stupid mistake, years ago. And I spent every day after that trying to make it right. You, on the other hand, have been sneaking around for months. You didn't even try to fix things." She crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with defiance. "How could I, Jack? Every time I looked at you, all I could see was her. You shattered my trust, and I don't know if it ever came back. Then why stay?" I demanded, standing now, the space between us crackling with tension. "Why go through the motions for years if you couldn't forgive me?" Her voice cracked, the anger giving way to something more vulnerable. "Because I loved you. Because I wanted to believe we could get back to what we had. And Greg?" I spat. "Was he supposed to help with that?" Her expression darkened. "Greg made me feel wanted again. Like I wasn't just a placeholder in your life." Her words stung, but there was something raw and honest in them that I couldn't ignore. Still, it didn't absolve her actions. "And now?" I asked, my voice quieter. "Where do we go from here, Sherry? Because I can't pretend this didn't happen." She looked away, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know, Jack. I don't know if there's anything left to save." The silence that followed was suffocating. We were two people who had once built a life together, now standing in the ruins of it, unsure whether to rebuild or walk away. Finally, she turned toward the stairs. "I'm going to bed. We can talk more tomorrow." I didn't stop her. Instead, I poured another drink and stared at the darkened window, wondering how we could ever untangle the mess we'd made. Tomorrow felt like a lifetime away, and I wasn't sure we'd survive it. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Sherry's absence from our usual routines was palpable. No sound of her in the kitchen, no clinking of her coffee mug on the counter. I thought about heading upstairs, but the weight of last night's confrontation kept me planted at the dining table, staring at the empty plate in front of me. Eventually, I heard her soft footsteps descending the stairs. She looked hesitant, her hair pulled back and her face bare of the makeup she usually wore as armor. She held a mug of tea, but the way her hands trembled slightly betrayed her nerves. "Morning," she said softly, as if testing the waters. I nodded but didn't respond. What was there to say? She sat across from me, her eyes scanning my face as though searching for a trace of the man she married. "I've been thinking," she started, her voice tentative. About us. About everything. And? I said, keeping my tone neutral. It felt like we were circling a drain, both waiting for the other to throw out a lifeline, or let go entirely. I don't know if we can come back from this, she admitted, her words heavy with resignation. I don't know if we even want to. Her honesty hit like a gut punch. I should have been relieved to hear her voice what I'd been dreading, but instead, I felt a surge of anger. Anger at her, at myself, at the years we'd wasted trying to ignore the cracks in our marriage. What do you want, Sherry? I asked, leaning forward. Do you want this to end? Do you want to pack up and leave? Be with Greg? Her face twisted into a pained expression. I don't know. I don't even know what I want anymore, Jack. You know what I think? I said, my voice rising. I think you already made your choice the moment you decided to sneak around with him. And you made your choice, she shot back. The night you decided some random woman was worth more than your vows to me. The room fell silent, our words hanging in the air like smoke. I guess we both burned this house down, I muttered, more to myself than to her. She sighed, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. Maybe we did. After a long pause, she stood, taking her tea with her. I'm going to stay with Lisa for a few days, she said quietly. I think we need some space. Her words cut deeper than I expected. And Greg? I asked bitterly. Will he be there too? She froze, her shoulders stiff. I'm not seeing him anymore. I didn't know if I believed her, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Fine, I said. Go. She nodded and walked away, leaving me alone in the house we'd once built together. The silence that followed was deafening. The next few days passed in a haze. I went to work, kept my head down, and avoided calls from mutual friends who'd heard something was going on. At night, I sat alone in the living room, the house feeling too big, too empty. I didn't hear from Sherry, and I didn't reach out. It was as if we were both waiting for the other to make the first move, or the final one. By the fourth night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Vacations, holidays, lazy Sunday mornings. Each picture felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of what we'd lost, or maybe what we'd never truly had. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text from Sherry. Can we talk tomorrow? I'll come by in the afternoon. I stared at the screen, my emotions swirling. Did I want to talk? Did I want to fight for this marriage, or let it go? Sure, I typed back, though I wasn't sure at all. Tomorrow was coming, and with it, the decision that would shape the rest of our lives. Sherry arrived the next afternoon, punctual as always. She walked in wearing a simple sweater and jeans, looking more subdued than I'd seen her in years. There were no dramatic entrances, no carefully constructed excuses, just a woman who looked as tired as I felt. Hey, she said softly, standing awkwardly near the doorway. Hey, I replied, gesturing to the couch. You want to sit? She hesitated but finally nodded, sitting on the edge of the cushion as if ready to bolt at any moment. I took the armchair across from her, creating a buffer of space between us that felt both necessary and suffocating. For a few moments, we just sat there, the silence pressing down like a weight. Finally, Sherry broke it. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. About us, about everything. So have I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. And? She sighed, looking down at her hands. I need to be honest with you, Jack. I've been holding on to a lot of anger at you, at myself, at everything we've let slip away. Her words stung, but I nodded. Go on. When I found out about your mistake, she continued, her voice trembling, I thought I could move past it. I thought if we just kept going, if we kept pretending everything was fine, it would heal on its own. But it didn't. It festered. And I let it. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. And Greg? Her face twisted with guilt. Greg was a way to feel something again. After years of feeling like I was invisible, like we were just going through the motions. He made me feel seen. You were never invisible to me, I said, my voice cracking. I know I screwed up, Sherry. But I spent every day after that trying to show you how much you meant to me. And I saw that, she admitted, her eyes glistening. But the trust was gone, Jack. And without it, I don't know how to rebuild what we had. Her honesty cut deeper than any accusation. I could hear the truth in her words, and it left me feeling raw and exposed. So what now? I asked. Do we just call it quits? Throw away everything we've built? She shook her head, tears spilling over. I don't want to give up on us, Jack. But I don't know how to fix this. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Then let's figure it out, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Let's stop pretending we're fine and actually deal with this, for real this time. Sherry looked at me, her expression a mix of hope and fear. You really think we can? I don't know, I admitted. But if we don't try, we'll never know. We spent the next few hours talking, really talking, about everything we'd been holding back for years. It wasn't easy. There were tears, raised voices, and long silences where neither of us knew what to say. But for the first time in a long time, we were honest with each other. By the time Sherry left that evening, we hadn't come to any concrete solutions, but we'd taken the first step towards something we hadn't done in years, truly listening. As I watched her drive away, I felt an unfamiliar mix of emotions, relief, exhaustion, and a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. But I also knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. And even then, there were no guarantees. The days following Sherry's visit were a strange mix of cautious optimism and simmering tension. We agreed to try counseling, though it wasn't lost on either of us that trying didn't guarantee success. For the first session, we met at an office downtown, neutral ground, with a neutral party. Dr. Flynn, our therapist, was calm, patient, and sharp as a scalpel. So, Dr. Flynn began, sitting back in her chair. What brought you both here? Sherry glanced at me, then looked down at her hands. We've been through a lot, she started hesitantly. There's been infidelity on both sides. And it's broken something between us, I added, my voice firmer. We're here to figure out if it can be fixed. Dr. Flynn nodded, her pen poised above a notepad. Infidelity often points to deeper issues. Let's talk about what led up to it. Jack, you mentioned this started with you? I stiffened, the weight of my past mistake pressing down on me. 5 years ago, I made a terrible decision, I admitted. I was out of town for work, got drunk, and well, I betrayed Sherry. And what happened after? Dr. Flynn asked. I told her the next day, I said, glancing at Sherry. I couldn't live with the lie. I begged her to forgive me, and she said she would. But I think I underestimated how much damage I'd done. Sherry nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I wanted to forgive him, she said softly. I thought I could. But it stayed with me, eating away at how I saw him, how I saw us. I never told him how much it hurt, how much it changed me. And that led to Greg? Dr. Flynn prompted. Sherry winced. Greg came along when I was at my lowest. I didn't plan for it to happen, but he gave me something I hadn't felt in years, attention, validation. It felt safe, in a twisted way, because it wasn't real. Hearing her talk about Greg in those terms didn't make it easier, but it added a layer of understanding I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about pain neither of us had confronted. And how do you feel about each other now? Dr. Flynn asked, her voice calm but probing. Sherry and I exchanged a look. For a moment, I wasn't sure if either of us could answer. I still love her, I said finally, my voice steady. I always have. But I don't know if I trust her anymore. Sherry's face crumpled, and she wiped at her eyes. I love you too, Jack, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I don't know if I can forgive myself for what I've done, or if you can. The session ended with no clear resolution, but it left us both with plenty to think about. Over the next few weeks, we continued therapy, each session peeling back another layer of resentment, guilt, and unspoken fears. It was grueling, emotional work, and some days it felt like we were moving backward instead of forward. Outside therapy, things remained tense. We were polite but distant, careful not to step on the raw wounds we'd uncovered. Every interaction felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon of unresolved pain. One evening, after another difficult session, Sherry sat down beside me on the couch. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked quietly. "What do you mean?" I said, setting down the book I wasn't really reading. "Trying to fix this," she said, gesturing between us. "Do you think we're just delaying the inevitable?" Her question hit me hard. I'd asked myself the same thing a dozen times, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel more real. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think if we walk away now, we'll always wonder if we could have saved it." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I guess I just don't want to hurt you any more than I already have. And I don't want to hurt you either," I said. "But if we're going to do this, we have to be all in." She looked at me then, her blue eyes filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. "Okay," she said. "All in." It wasn't a promise of success, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might actually have a chance. The following weeks tested the fragile truths Sherry and I had managed to forge. Counseling sessions pushed us to confront truths we had buried long ago, truths about how we communicated, or more often, how we failed to. The cracks in our marriage hadn't started with my mistake or her affair. They had begun years before, in the quiet moments when we chose silence over honesty. One night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, Sherry broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I set down my fork, meeting her gaze. "All the time," I admitted. "But I also wonder what happens if we don't try." She nodded, staring down at her plate. I want to believe we can get through this, but I don't know if I can trust myself anymore." Her words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I've spent so much time being angry at you, Jack. Angry about what you did, what it took from us. But now, I'm just angry at myself. For Greg. For letting things get this far." For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the Sherry I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, vulnerable, honest, unguarded. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe we weren't just circling the drain. "I'm not perfect, Sherry," I said, my voice soft. "I've made mistakes. Big ones. But I still want to try. If you do." She looked at me then, her blue eyes filled with uncertainty but also a flicker of hope. "I do," she said finally. "But I need time. And I need to know you're not just saying this because it's easier than walking away." Her words stung, but I understood. "I'm here because I want to be, not because it's easy," I said firmly. "Walking away would be easier, but I don't think it's what either of us really wants." Our tentative alliance didn't erase the tension, but it gave us a direction. We started carving out time to be together, not as a couple desperately trying to fix something, but as two people reconnecting. We cooked dinner together, took long walks, even watched old movies we used to love. It wasn't perfect. Some nights, the weight of everything unsaid still hung between us like a fog. But there were also moments of laughter, of shared memories, that reminded us of why we'd fought for this in the first place. One evening, after a particularly good day, Sherry surprised me. "I ended things with Greg," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Completely. No lingering texts, no what-ifs. I wanted you to know." I stared at her, the words sinking in. It was the first time she'd voluntarily brought up Greg since our confrontation. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know. It's the least I can do," she said softly. "I owe you, and us, that much." For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same team again. It wasn't an easy feeling to trust, but it was a start. Of course, not every moment was hopeful. There were days when doubt crept in, whispering that we were fighting a losing battle. Days when a single word or gesture would dredge up old wounds, threatening to undo the progress we made. But each time, we came back to the same question: was this worth it? For now, the answer was yes. But the road ahead was far from clear, and part of me wondered if we were holding on to something already broken. Months passed, and though Sherry and I were far from the couple we once were, we had settled into something that felt steady. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't the chaos we'd been drowning in either. Counseling sessions became less about tearing open wounds and more about learning how to move forward, how to communicate without letting resentment take over. But there was one session that changed everything. Dr. Flynn leaned forward that day, her sharp eyes cutting through the quiet tension between us. "You've both made progress," she said. "But we need to address the big question you've been avoiding. Do you truly want to stay together, or are you holding on out of fear of letting go?" Her words hung in the air like a challenge. I glanced at Sherry, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I want to stay," I said, my voice firm. "Not because I'm afraid to leave, but because I believe we can rebuild something worth keeping." Sherry's eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment I thought she might agree. But then she looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I did, but I'm scared. What if we're just delaying the inevitable? What if this all falls apart again?" Her honesty was a knife to the gut. Dr. Flynn nodded. "Fear is natural. But staying in limbo will only hurt you both. You need to make a choice, and live with it." That night, the house felt heavier than usual. We barely spoke over dinner, the silence broken only by the clink of silverware. Finally, Sherry pushed her plate aside and looked at me. "Jack," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I need to know something. If I said I couldn't do this anymore, if I said I needed to leave, would you hate me?" Her question stole the breath from my lungs. "I wouldn't hate you," I said carefully. "But it would break my heart." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I love you, Jack. I always have. But I think we've hurt each other too much to ever fully heal. I don't want to spend the rest of our lives stuck in this cycle of trying and failing." The finality in her words hit like a blow. For all the progress we'd made, all the hope I'd clung to, I realized then that she had already made up her mind. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice cracking. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sure. And I think deep down you know it too." The next few weeks were a blur of quiet goodbyes. Sherry moved in with Lisa temporarily while we figured out the logistics of splitting our lives. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic ultimatums, just two people unraveling the threads of a life they'd spent years weaving together. On the day she came to collect the last of her things, we stood in the living room, the space between us heavy with unspoken words. "I hope you find happiness, Jack," she said, her voice trembling. "You too," I replied. "And for what it's worth, I don't regret the life we built. Even if it ended like this." She smiled through her tears, then turned and walked out the door. In the months that followed, I threw myself into work and tried to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Some days were easier than others. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text Sherry about something trivial, only to remember that she wasn't there anymore. But with time, the wounds began to close. I learned to live with the silence in the house, to embrace the solitude instead of fearing it. And though our marriage didn't survive, I like to think we left it with a kind of peace. We weren't the people we once were, but we'd loved each other fiercely, even in our flaws. In the end, maybe that was enough.